Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. In this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, I'm so pleased to have with us this week Dr. Hope Umansky. She is a strategic consultant in the higher education space. Her focus with her PhD is in the teaching and learning space as well. Dr. Hope, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simone. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to your listeners.
Wonderful. Well, tell us a little bit more about what you're currently doing.
What I'm currently doing is kind of a conglomeration of a career spent in academia, specifically higher education. I've been a 26-year career educator. I still teach every week at university, and I have been in the CXO leadership space for a decade before I decided that I, as a CEO of a 501c3 nonprofit school. And after a decade there, nearing that decade mark, I decided to own my career and be in the driver's seat, and that I wanted to expand what I believe are the values of compassionate leadership and compassionate education and positive regard for learners, especially adult learners. I wanted to bring that into a consulting practice. So I have a company now called Educations Advocacy Advocacy Group. And it is where I work with 501c3s and higher ed. I now do like 7 through 12 and higher ed and graduate school, but we create strategic initiatives to drive growth and really shift from a hierarchical mode of leadership to more of that compassionate interactional leadership, which really engages a community. So that is what I'm passionate about, in reaching more of that interactive leadership, collaborative leadership. I think the times for that, top to bottom leadership or bottom to top I think that's outdated. I think it's an outmoded level of archetype. And we are moving in the new decade, and in the time of COVID, we are moving out of that. And I think people are, reinventing or reconfirming ideas of leadership that they've had before, but now I think it's taking a much greater stance.
Wonderful.
Out of necessity, yeah.
I wonder if you could share with us just your journey to the driver's seat. We jumped right to the driver's seat, which I love.
Okay.
Tell us about just the thought process and what you had to do to make a decision to really step into the driver's seat and to make a shift after you said a decade in a certain area, and now deciding you want to do something a bit different and have more control. Tell us about that journey.
Okay, it was very, to uncover it is to be vulnerable, which is, I think, the key to actually compassionate leadership. So I'm really glad you asked that question. I had been teaching, and just regular college teaching, evenings, 2 or 3 nights a week, and grading and doing that. And when I moved into administration 14 years ago, it's an 8 to 4 or 8 to 5, which usually goes to 8 to 7 or 8 at night type job. And leadership in education is really, I think, a 24/7 model. I think you have to be a servant leader. And I always had that idea in mind, that I'm a servant leader to the students and the institutional mission. And, after a decade of being told kind of, I have to write with the school mission in mind, and my identity is fashioned under these institutional umbrellas, which I think happens to a lot of women in the consulting space or in the CXO space, that you're really limited. And I started maybe about a year and a half before I left, I started having that feeling, that feeling that you can't quite push away anymore, that like, maybe this isn't what I want to do, and I started feeling like, God, there's so many people that I could reach. And what drives me is really the students who then say, you know what, I didn't know I can communicate so effectively, or people, that I advise or mentor, like I never knew that leadership was so just normal, you know what I mean? That I could just be a human in this. So the answer is like surprisingly not something complicated. It's in more getting the courage to really, it's a leap of faith. I mean, it's really a leap of faith to decide to leave a very steady career and to strike out on your own as a writer and a consultant and a speaker. And it really took me about a year and a half to get to that level of discomfort that I knew I had to make a change. And that level, you start thinking in your head, am I playing it small? Am I not thinking big enough? What kind of impact can I have in society? Like my values are, I would say, very spiritual in nature. Like I'm relational. I believe in compassionate leadership, compassionate educational principles. And sometimes the higher ed space, especially before COVID, was not necessarily receptive to that. But I felt that I had something to say about educational accessibility. I believe that everyone who wants a higher education should be able to get it. So I have dedicated, my career in the adult education arena, and that has formed my beliefs around education. I had to get uncomfortable. I've been a single mother for 14 years. And that, I would say, has been the hardest challenge to overcome, because there are some very outdated ideas about what constitutes work. And I think in the COVID era, we really have come into that. And so I guess I predated that in saying, I don't want to be limited anymore. I want to be available to my family. I want to be in control of my own schedule. I don't want to have to answer calls 24/7. Like my family's the priority. And it really took time and a vulnerability, and to really look deep and say, okay, if I take this leap of faith, it might crash and, I need to find another administrator job, or it might actually open me up. And it's frightening. It's scary when you're the sole income earner in your household. But I have to tell you, like, I am so glad I looked deep. And it was really after I had several personal tragedies. Like my daughter had been very sick and had gotten over that. And then my mother was very sick, and she passed away. And I continued working in that space during this, but that feeling that I'm not giving my all to myself and to my family really drove me to try to think out of the box and say, I have these visions, and I feel schools aren't really serving students in the way they need to. And we see this now with the COVID era more than ever. And to really say, I'm going to make this something. I want to bring my compassionate leadership abilities out and hopefully maybe shift some ideas in women, particularly about what they can do and how they can leave what appears to be a safe space, but actually I almost feel that not being true to yourself, this is what I came to, I can only speak personally, but not being true to what my heart was telling me was really holding me back and dampening my creativity, my personality, my drive, my motivation. And I really felt like I was kind of dying inside. And every day that cognitive dissonance kind of grows and grows, where what you do and who you are doesn't meet anymore. And you're on a different road, and really embracing what that is. So without the guise of an institutional umbrella or having to present myself as a school officer all the time, I have found my creative spark is back, and I have found my ideas about leadership have even gotten stronger, especially as society is in such great need of love, quite frankly, the profound, higher, universal love.
I wonder, what would you say is, based on your experience in nonprofit, academia, and now entrepreneurship, what are the secret ingredients, if you will, or what's the formula for successfully owning your career?
I think it is grit, that combination of resilience, integrity, compassion, and ability to keep going even when it's rough, to be vulnerable, to say what you need, and stay true to yourself. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier, that to stay, as a woman especially, when you want to say something, say it. When you feel you're being treated unfair, speak up. And I didn't do that until I moved into like my late 40s, to not to date me as a dinosaur or anything, but I didn't, especially in, sometimes the work career space as a woman, we have to be aware of that. We know that there are unconscious biases against, our whole society now is talking about these unconscious biases against women, against people of color, that has really come into relief this year. So I would say it's a mix of integrity, values, your cemented, your concrete values as a human being, and vulnerability, really, of being able to say, this isn't working for me. I'm not happy anymore. What is it that I want to do for society? It's really a drive to help people. And, half the things I write, maybe one person reads them, and the other half, maybe I get a lot of readership. You never know. Is something going to fall? Or when you're speaking, is this going to be, the audience really dictates the energy? Like, is this going to be a flop or is this going to work? You really don't know. And it's the ability to not care, that the reason you're doing what you're doing, I feel, is because you have a drive to help, and you have a drive to help people see things differently, or own their own perspective, or create their own model of what they want.
And if you were to define or put a label, I hate to say label, but just thinking about your extensive career experience, what would the title of the book be, or the your career body of work? What's sticking out for you?
Yeah, I hate to oversell this, or I hate to use this word all the time, but especially when I was working on the chapter that's going to be in the book, Upward, Leadership Lessons for Women on the Rise, that's coming up in the spring with Bridget and you, that grit kept coming up to me, like grit. And when I first looked at the model, I thought, I don't want to write a linear journey, right? The hero's arc, or like the arc of personal development, is usually like, what happened, how did you kind of how did it come to a head, and kind of what it's like now. That's typically, the arc of a journey. And I really wanted to conceptualize growth for people, whether it's professional growth or personal growth or interpersonal growth. I wanted to really reconceptualize it, that leadership is something that we all have, that we can step in, especially as women, into that archetype of a powerful female leader that is resilient, that has integrity, that isn't necessarily quiet when microaggressions or macroaggressions happen to her. It's happened to me throughout my entire career. I had to really dig deep, and I had realized, to be vulnerable, that I had been falsely loyal to institutions my whole career. And I had kind of subjugated myself and my own values and my own belief in who I am to these larger things, and not said things, and I did not speak up when there were small microaggressions, like, oh, we're setting a meeting, we're going out to eat at 7 p.m. You need to come. You're the CEO, or you're the, before that I was an academic skills administrator at a different college. We're just doing it. And as a single mother, everybody knows you can't do that all the time. You have responsibilities. And I was the sole female administrator in most of the jobs I have been in. And it's really challenging. And, people will unconsciously, or sometimes even outright, say to you, you don't have any business doing this with your obligations or responsibilities. And even despite being excellent, or never missing a deadline, or never, or not doing what needs to be done, these things still kind of happen. And they feel, honestly, pardon my French, crappy when it happens. And it's like a little piece of yourself kind of crumbles when this happens. And it was really that place where I got to where I wasn't silent anymore. I just needed to say what I needed to say, that I really decided to take that leap of faith, because the cognitive dissonance became more pronounced than my desire to stay loyal. And it was really a shift to, like, why am I being institutionally loyal to these schools? including schools that I had gone to, where maybe things had happened or microaggressions or big overt things had happened, to really, because I couldn't say, one place was rotten or this happened, but it's kind of a conglomeration of things that happen over a career where you realize I've really lost myself. I've really taken the spark out of my creativity, and creativity is so important for women and people in general, but creativity is so important because I think we are natural creators. We multitask, biological psychology talks about there are physiological differences in women's brains to men's brains. There are, that is undeniable. We have a structural difference in our brains. We learn differently. We process information differently, way beyond men are from Mars and women from Venus. I'm talking like a higher level of understanding and relating to the world, and really saying, I don't want to be the hard ass, tough administrator. That's not who I am. And to see whether or not your values match with who you work. And when you look at with where you work, and when you look at that and realize it really doesn't, having kind of the strength and the grit and courage and faith, quite frankly, to take that leap and say, I'm going to create my own life. I need to take ownership of my life. And so that was really the thought process.
While you were doing that work to make the decision to have a shift, what resources along the way, you've emphasized a bit around vulnerability, integrity, and really being true to your values and who you are authentically. What resources were you using to help you to be courageous in making that switch?
Well, quite honestly, it didn't really happen during the time. It happened in kind of the time when you leave, like I had made the decision and then kind of it unfolded. And I really took a deep dive into the leadership literature, especially I looked at Brené Brown's, her TED Talks, her books, and Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, because I really needed to understand that this discomfort I was feeling was kind of a pain body, and that the vulnerability of being able to admit, this is where I am, this is who I am, and how am I going to shift that into a higher model? And I really, sometimes I feel that the female experience, that the human experience can transcend the female experience. And I like to talk a lot about the human experience of being uplifted and compassionate and having, strong values and integrity. But in this sense, I think the female archetype or the female leader, Brené Brown was invaluable. Eckhart Tolle was invaluable. I watched a lot of videos about spiritual leadership or universal leadership on TED Talks and YouTube. And that really helped cement for me what I wanted to do and move away from this, girl boss or hashtag lady boss kind of mentality. Like, why do I have to put a label on it? Just a leader, you know what I mean? Just, I'm a human and a leader. Why does that need to be, the hashtag lady boss or girl boss, or all these ways that we still kind of label female leaders in this culture? So I really had to get right with myself spiritually and emotionally to understand. So I found those sources to be really invaluable. And for me personally, the Chronicle of Higher Education, in kind of a, that's not how I want to do it sense. You know what I mean? Like, this is why I don't want to be in an institution, because I want to lead things a little to the left of that. I think that unconditional positive regard for students or people really needs to be our model. And I can't, say it enough. I really feel that spiritually, realistically, this country and in reality has to move into that space. And I think the pandemic, the election, all the stuff that is happening right now has really seeped into our regular culture in terms of people saying, we need a different way. We need to do things differently. And to really just spend that time looking at videos that are compelling to you, and not necessarily, you don't have to agree with everything, but that allow you the space to find yourself. And I also found a lot of solace in Adrienne Rich's writing, which I had read originally in college. She wrote a lot of what her work between 1970 and 1974. And going back to that as a woman, especially her poem, Diving into the Wreck, which I kind of deconstruct in my chapter and Upward, really resonated for me in terms of the ladder, your ladder, which is really like your rescue valve, like your, break in case of emergency box that we all have, that we kind of store as our internal guide. Like, when the chips fall and the cards fall, we return to self and return to those values. And her model of a ladder really resonated with me. She says, the ladder is always there. You can climb out of it at any time. It doesn't matter if, like she says, you're written in the book of myths. That's irrelevant. And really just saying, I'm going to make a change anyway, and leading by example. Does that answer the question? Kind of circuitously?
What came up for me is sort of the title of your episode, climb out at any time. I like to title the episodes a nice tagline that represents each guest that I have, and it usually speaks to me during the interview. And so I know you talked a lot about grit, but I feel, just that comment right there, climb out at any time, and the fact that it resonates with you is a good title for your episode.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that I had thought about was Flannery O'Connor, a Southern Gothic novelist whose her work lives on in academia. I don't know how popular she is out of that. Her works are very complex and rich, but she has a story called The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And I can't get that out of my mind every day. The life you save may be your own. And that is kind of what the story is about that sometimes to be true to self may feel like a betrayal to somebody else, or to an institution, or to an outmoded relationship, whether it's romantic or just familial or whatever it is in our personal, that we own our own life, beyond just saying, well, I own my feelings, or I feel this, or I feel that in communication, like really realizing like the life I save may be my own. And to harness that care for self that maybe we had as children, or that we were raised with, and I lost along the way somehow.
I don't think you're alone in losing your way. And I'm pondering your comments about institutional loyalty and just having that resonate with myself. And I'm sure it's resonating with some of our listeners as well, that you can in fact lose your way no matter what type of employer or employee type relationship, entrepreneurship, nonprofit, corporate space. You can lose your way, and it's quite a bit of work to rewire your brain to make yourself a priority and to get back to the authentic you. I love that you said during the interview that you found that creative spark again. And I think it's so important. So, well said. And kudos to you on this journey. As we begin to wrap up the interview, are there any parting words of advice that you can offer to our audience wanting to take control of their careers, be in the driver's seat?
Would it be okay if I read the last paragraph of my chapter in Upward? Because I really feel it encapsulates the vision of what I wanted to say to the young female leader. Would that be okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
To do that? Okay, so one of the things I say in 2020, if we have lived through it, we have lived and possibly died by its vagaries. The hero's journey is not an arc, a bell curve, or a linear line of heightened conflict and the relief of integration. It's a non-linear unfolding of events. And I am humbled by the answer, as that it's grit, as well as maybe there isn't an answer at all of how to be a leader other than just being true to self. And what I would like to say is to young girls and women that my wish for them is to let's envision the best of the best of the best for you. You living your best life beyond what you think is imaginable, and let's envision that beyond place and go beyond there together. And it was really important for me to end with this idea that women need to be more collaborative, more helpful, more supportive of other women. If we can't be supportive of each other, and all the different subtleties, and I'm talking all cuts, sizes, shapes of life, if we can't be supportive for each other and not tear each other down, how would we expect other people to? How do we expect institutions to? How do we expect the larger society to do that if we can't collaborate and help and support other women? And I just can't emphasize that enough. I wish I had learned that lesson earlier. I went to a women's college and I had that idea, but somehow, it falls away with personal ambition or just how your career I never expected to be a CEO. I never expected to be an administrator. I just wanted to teach and write and help a few people, and it kind of happened. I kind of say sometimes I'm an accidental administrator or an accidental CEO because I really like the interfacing of people. But I guess to really look at how can I support women on their journey, and how can I share maybe what I've learned. And I wish I had learned to speak up and put self before others a lot earlier than I had. But it's, we can reinvent. The beauty of life is you can reinvent yourself at any time. You can recalibrate, you can fix your compass to your true north at any time. We don't have to wait for someone to give us permission. And I think that's the biggest shift, is we don't wait for someone to give us permission or for space in our life. And I was, quite frankly, so in that space of I'm not happy, this isn't working for me anymore, that I thought my creative spark had died. I really thought my muse was gone, that I would never be able to share what I think with the world. And it wasn't. It took maybe a couple months for the processing to happen. And I dove into Brené Brown and Tolle, just like I was talking about, poetry, to kind of crystallize what I knew, but not to wait for permission to recalibrate and, adjust your compass to yourself.
So many nuggets there, Dr. Hope, so many nuggets. And I think oftentimes we can beat ourselves up because of the amount of time it takes to get to where we want to be. But, things happen in the way they are meant to be. And I go back to what you said about climbing out at any time and saving yourself. So many comments that you made just weave the episode nicely together. So I want to thank you for being a guest and sharing your expertise and wisdom with our audience. Can you please tell our audience how they can stay connected with you if they would like to?
Oh yeah, I would be happy to. I would love to mentor or help anybody that wants to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Hope Umansky, Umansky, or you can find me on my website, which is, and I'll say it slowly, it is innovationsadvocacy.com. So innovationsadvocacy.com. And if you want to, my email is there for contact me, or you can reach me on LinkedIn, or just reach me on my personal Facebook page, and I'd be happy to connect.
Wonderful. Well, again, it's been my pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Look forward to, your chapter in Upward. And
thank you.
We've had Bridget on the episode, and, I'm sure we'll do more things. So excited to have you and share more about your personal journey. Again, thanks for being a guest on this week's episode of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your readers' engagement.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@simonemorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.